Un, deux. Et j'ai besoin du micro ou pas? Il y a des gens qui écoutent à distance, c'est ça? Ok.
Hello everyone, I hope you had a good lunch. Welcome to this new and last workshop session. I switch in French. As you know, everything is translated in English and French. At the same time, you choose your channel. I don't forget at 5 p.m. and beyond the final, so don't miss that for sure, it's important. Thank you in advance, and thank you to all the people that are online following us for this 2.5 day at the heart of managerial innovation and purpose-driven organizations. So in French, merci Ludovic pour d'animer cette...
So thank you, Ludovic, for running this handsome session. For those of you who don't know this, those of you who are here can obtain Ludovic's book on becoming a more agile company. I've read it and I've been a critique of it. And so I can say that he's he's a very good teacher. He looks at practical aspects. He gives us information that's very useful for putting it into practice. Of course, he's summarized years of experience in this book. It's very practical. It's very opposite to, or opposed to, our sort of airy-fairy discussions. And I think that the workshop is going to be very interesting because of this. And I'm now going to hand the floor to you, Ludovic. But before I say this, Become an Agile Enterprise, that's the book. It's something a book you can find online and in all the good bookshops and on e-commerce or e-trade bookshops. It's self-edited, so it's not that available all over the place, but you can download it also from our website. The topic of the session I'm going to be talking about today will be participative at certain moments, not right at the beginning, and I'll be talking about succeeding in agile transformation, but it can be sociocratic or whatever. So succeeding in your whatever transformation. Now, who was here at Niels's workshop this morning? Could you raise your hand, please? I'd like to warn you, there are many subjects on which we don't agree, and that will be the crossroads of our points of view and the confrontation of these points of view. That's the wealth of the discussion. A sentence I use a great deal by Oscar Wilde is that I'm no longer young enough to know everything, and so I'm presenting myself and presenting my subject with a great deal of modesty and humbleness. I don't purport to have more truth than Niels. Now, the question I want to analyze with you today is how a company can actually change and transform, despite the fact that individual change is something that's very difficult. We're going to start with a small trial. Maybe you could tell me how many people are following this session remotely. You can play remotely as well. You can raise your hand on the live chat, if you are able to do so. Who was or is a smoker? Who has tried to start up, exercise, do exercise? Who's tried to go on a diet? Well, this is what we're going to talk about today. So this means that how, in an organization, are we able altogether to commit to structuring changes, despite the fact that we've all had the experiment that changing on an individual level can be a true, a challenge. I co-founded a company called Octa Technology. We have approximately 900 employees to date. It is maybe the first consulting firm in France to use agile methodologies and methods in approximately 2010, and following that we launched a model on decentralization. It was based on tribes, nothing to do with Spotify models, but it echoes to that sort of process. What we set up were self-organized company or teams in the company, and the last transformation we started working on 2 years ago now, and we're sort of bang in the middle of the transformation, is one towards the 3.0 sociocracy system. Now, I've been in this company for 23 years, so I feel that I do have sufficient or quite a lot of experience of transformation. And now we're talking about a sizable transformation, so I'm aware of the fact that we're not in a size company as sizable as and as big as Société Générale, SNCF, or Decathlon. Our company is far smaller in size, and I'm not able, and I will talk about this, to say whether that my experiment and experience is transferable to this type of situation. We'll see. And at many moments during the presentation, I'll say to you, I don't know, because when we're talking about transformation, people who know everything about it think, I wouldn't say they're imposters, but there are areas of major doubt when we start or embark on a transformation journey. I've written 2 jobs, one that studied the practices of the web companies when they were more glamorous. It's a bit complex because we now know that don't be evil is not all that true. And then lastly, becoming an agile company. as Luc just said in his introduction, is something I try to do. I try to translate into real words what have struck me. I'm a former smoker. I stopped smoking. After stopping smoking, I piled on the pounds, and so as all smokers who stop smoking, and so then I had to go onto a diet. So I'm very affected by what I just talked about. Now, when I brought this slide out, this is Octa, it was a moment when we hadn't yet fully bought up a company called Be Next, and they've joined us since this slide. There are just over 900 people now in the company. We're B Corp certified. We finished #1 as a great place to work this year. We've took place in the winning competition of Be a Great Place to Work 6 times. It's where people, enjoy living and working. 3 times we were third, and 3 times we were second. We were chosen for the conference of companies for the climate. I was talking about this a couple of days ago. You may not have been there. It's an initiative that was duplicated for the Citizens Agreement on Climate. It brings together 150 companies to issue recommendations on the way in which the world of the economy can commit to things and make proposals to politicians on what to do with challenges in order to meet climate challenges. What does company transformation mean? Well, I'm a consultant and a director, a director of a company. I use a great deal of models, and it's also a testimonial from the point of view of a manager, but I can't remove the consultancy part of what I say. The best definition I've found is the one at the top. It's a voluntary mechanism that aims at making changes to improve significantly the efficacy of the organization and/or the satisfaction of stakeholders. Now, what I quite like about the first quotation is that it's voluntary. You project something better that you then turn into a transformation. You're not going to project something worse, of course, but what I like about the second one that isn't in the first one is
efficiency, donc l'idée d'avoir des critères de succès pour savoir si on...
So having success criteria to know if we're going in the right direction. So what we notice is that many consulting firms have looked at companies that have succeeded in transformation, and it actually doesn't work. 70% of companies. It's difficult to define success, actually. You'll agree with me, probably. Often the way in which it is, the angle they take in these studies is, has the initiative missed by 50% of the targets that were set, and have the lead times gone beyond the time by 50%. And when you do these tests, it's the same ratio. So just off the top of my head, it's 2/3 of the transformation processes that actually fail. So it is quite difficult. It's a difficult process. Now, there are various reasons behind this. This research often comes hand in hand with the reasons for which it hasn't succeeded. Let me give you a few basic ones. There's the issue of defining. Was the transformation process well defined? Were we clearly set on what we were expecting from transformation? And what I notice often is that companies that start or embark on transformation are not that clear about the KPIs that they will follow and why they are following them. Now, these KPIs, were they realistic? Increasing your margin by 200% within a period of 2 years may be quite funky in terms of transformation, but it may not be fully realistic. If you don't meet those targets, it doesn't mean that you haven't been able to transform. It may be that the target was not actually very realistic or clever. Was it relevant? Well, the increase in margin, is it a target that the company should be seeking at all costs? If they already have 20 to 30% of EBITDA, increasing the margin may not be the ideal target as well. Now, all of these definitions that measure failure in relation to the non-achieving of a target that may be arbitrary is slightly bothersome to me. And so I would like to suggest an alternative to this type of definition, and that's transformation is the acquiring of new cultural reflexes in terms of behavior and in terms of management styles. That's more or less the definition that I'm going to be using for the rest of this talk. And I'll come back to this, actually, because there is a book in the IT world that is absolutely fascinating, because it's a chap who's involved in systemic development, a disciple of Virginia Satir, who worked a great deal on family-based therapy, and he says that a company has operated change when Gerard Weinberg, he wrote Qualities of Management, and he explains that transformation happens when, during a crisis, moment of crisis, we use the new protocols available and not the old ones. And same here, I'm going to call upon your experience. If you've actually passed your driving test, maybe you remember when you braked the first times. Generally, you screech to a halt and sort of slightly slide, and then you learn how to do it more subtly. And then when a lorry comes out, you know how to brake without actually banging your foot on the brake. You can actually do it smoothly, and the reflex you get follows the new modalities and rules. That's the reflex you have to have in changing a company. What do you put in place when you're in a situation of emergency in a company? So control is, and how we carry out control is what comes back when there's a stress moment, the pandemic, for example, and you're probably in this period at the moment, and you haven't yet moved into the other world. That was, sort of an allusion I was alluding to what was talked about this morning. Now, a reason why transformation is also that difficult, and to give you a little story, is that change is often for others. In this way of perceiving it, I quite like this picture because actually it illustrates what the phenomenon is, and it's quite unusual because there's always this person with a sort of leadership authority talking to people who are more or less in an inferior situation. Now, I like this picture, but there are lots of variations of this. But the underlying aspect is that the boss wants the employees to change, and the employees don't actually want to change. I think it's probably far more tricky than that. But the change itself is complicated. You've been on diets, you've tried to stop smoking, you've noticed that it's not easy. Thomas Kuhn, I read this not long ago, and I found it very interesting. This chap is no longer with us, but was fantastic. He studied how to broadcast and scientific thoughts. He noticed that a new scientific paradigm was essential when everyone was dead. All of the tenets of the former paradigm were not there anymore. It's not a great lesson in hope, is it? But there we go. Now, why is transformation so difficult? I suggest some explanations for this that are based on psychology or sociology. I don't know which term is the best suited, but what I can see is that it's more difficult to learn than to unlearn. I noticed that in Octa, when we hire people who are out of the major universities, they come into the company within the standard of a company, and for them it seems obvious, so they develop quite naturally in this. If we take people with 10 years of experience, it's somewhat more tricky, and when we're already formatted with habits, we need to unlearn those habits and learn new ways of doing things, and it's more difficult. One of the other difficulties in change is that the retroactive loops can be very long. When you change something and you measure the consequences of it over the 6 months or year after, you don't really learn. You learn very fast with an electric or a source of heat. When you put your hand on something very, very hot, and you have to take it off very quickly because it's too hot, you learn very quickly. So learning is very much more effective when there's immediate feedback and quick feedback. Now, another element is that culture in a company is something that's very stable, and this is where I differ from the speaker this morning. Culture is the efficient response to a given situation. You can't say that there's rotten culture or bad culture. If you have a given cultural aspect in a company, it's because it had been relevant at some point to resolve problems at a given time. That's why it's hyperstable, because every time you go to try to change it, it comes to, or tries to come back to into its initial position because it has been efficient. We all have this way of looking forward into the future. For example, if you take your car to the garage in the morning and in the afternoon you get your appendix out and you say the same person who was doing your car in the morning wearing, full surgery gear, then you're going to really worry about it. You're going to be terrified. When we try to change, we have a lot to do. We try to pop on the surgeon's jacket and people say, well, I don't understand. You were wearing your mechanic's outfit this morning. Do you really know what you're doing? And this is one of the reasons why change is also super complicated. And then the last reason is the one I've mentioned a great deal, and that's that change is difficult on an individual level. So in the end, we don't really need. Sorry, I'll change that. So what's unusual is that the failure rate of transformation is pretty similar to the failure rate of stopping smoking, 70%. So it's not that bad, is it? Some people do stop smoking, so... Now, what is surprising is that if I look at the example of the cigarette, well, we changed super fast what was happening in a very short amount of time. If you're old enough, such as myself, to remember when there were people smoking on the plane or in the metro, yep. Well, you can see, if you see someone smoking on the platform, you think they're a delinquent. If they had hit someone with a stick or a bit of wood, then you probably would have been just as surprised and shocked. This change operated in a very quick way. Once, all of a sudden, cigarettes were tolerated in public places, and then all of a sudden they were forbidden, and our social standards have evolved in substantially. At the time, there are fewer of us, but 55 million people changed from one day to the next our mental picture in a very short amount of time. It's the same thing. We all learned how to wear masks. I watched the news at lunchtime, and it looks like things are not over yet. So, fantastic. Change, despite all of this, is possible on a large and wide scale. I think that it's more possible for simple actions and more complicated for more complex actions, and that's the challenge for companies. You're trying to get lots of people move on very complex subjects, so it's slightly more difficult, but it is a condition for survival, which means that the transformation of our company is essential, but we need to also transform all of the behavior of employees that will help us to be in a decarbonated economy between now and the next 10 to 20 years. And if we are not able to do this, well, there will be no economy, and we may not be there to talk about it. The challenge of change is a challenge that is very much a hot potato, and we have to be able to understand this dynamic in a deep way, because it's our survival really that's at stake. Now, how do we change things? I went to look at people who stopped smoking and how they analyzed it. I've taken this gentleman's name, Prochaska. He's a psychology professor who said that in stopping smoking and addictions in general, there were 6 different stages. 6 was phase. So phase 0 is contemplation. So pre-contemplation. I don't know why I would stop smoking anyway. I got less to the social security. I can do what I want. Cigarettes are cool. They mean you can socialize, and you can get to learn all of the ins and outs of the company. Then there's the contemplation phase, and that's the phase when I was describing it this morning. If you were there, it's when we become aware of the fact that there is an issue and that things could change. That would be good, but that we're not equipped to change. It's often to do with projection and problem. We think, I have to do this every morning. It means I'm going to have to get up at 7:30. If I go running, I'm going to have to put my short on. It's cold and I'm going to be frozen. I'm going to have to give up cigarettes during my coffee break and after meals. Not possible. It's a very complicated phase that is linked to the positive visualization of sports people, or the way sports people imagine this. I don't know if you know this, and I'm not a sportsman. High-level sports people mentally turn in their head everything they're going to be doing, and that's something that really defines or determines their success. This pre-contemplation phase or contemplation phase ends when you're able to project very clearly the benefits you're going to get and gain from stopping smoking. Then you move on to the preparation phase. You start putting in place the action plan that will help you to stop smoking, and then there's the action phase. And we're not going to spend loads of time talking about this. It's quite straightforward and managed in companies. Then the most interesting phase is the maintenance phase. It's very important because it's when you start giving in. You've made your resolutions at the beginning of the year. You've done a couple of weeks of sports. You're really happy. Your health or your stomach muscles are a bit stronger. You pop onto the scales and you can see the results. You're really into it. You do this for a month, and then after a month you think, it's a bit difficult, and this maintenance phase is difficult to run really, and that's when all smokers end up by giving in and smoking again. Maybe they give in, they go to an evening, loads of people are smoking, and that's when cigarettes are really cool to smoke, so you have another cigarette, and a week later you're smoking a packet a day. This maintenance phase is a key phase, and then the termination or ending phase, badly translated, sorry. it's the time when finally change is no longer a topic. A former smoker, can they testify? Someone who's stopped smoking in the past 10 years? Is there someone in this situation in the room who can testify to this? Or 5 years? Come on. Someone must have stopped smoking in the past 5 years. Or you're all smokers and... Okay. Can I ask you this. How long did it take you for you not to think any longer about cigarettes? 5 years. 5 years. 5 years. So you're no longer in the termination or ending phase. And that's the end phase is when it's no longer a subject. I think it took me 10 years. So good luck to you. So now we've thought about this, we think, well, what can we do? The few lessons I have is, number one, make transformation something desirable. It's contemplation, positive visualizing, as sports people, high-level sports people do, and how can we ensure that where we're aiming at is a target that we actually want. I don't know if you have gone into brief behavioral therapy phases. The first step is that you're asked to say, well, if we resolve this problem, if we're able to ensure that you no longer have a fear of spiders, that's a good subject for brief therapies or short therapies. What will happen and improve in your life? And it's quite good. It leads to this pathway for change. And I like these two quotes up on the board. The second is something that was written on the walls in 1968. Well, I wasn't around. I wasn't around at these meetings or these demonstrations in 1968. You don't fall in love with a growth rate, and my colleague says you don't fall in love with a P&L. And it puts into the right situation the fact that a lot of subjects in companies for change are linked to economic figures that can be important in some cases. But if the subject is to move from 20% EBITDA to 30% EBITDA, at some point, you might feel slightly less concerned by it. And then I like this quote as well. It's from a female activist in Russia at the beginning of the 20th century. She said, "If I can't dance, it's not my revolution." That's really very poetic and probably true. It's one of the subjects we have with the climate today. It's difficult to engage people on a subject that is quite somber in effect. And how can we carry out a transformation and turn it into something desirable that people can really take on board and take on? Now, second solution, leave time to time and to leaders. This is the subject I'm going to talk about with our friend. Our friend explained how we can do transformation processes in 90 days. I have, as a suggestion, 5 years. So I apologize to our friend Niels. That's the way I perceive it, but maybe it is possible in 90 days. I don't know. I have my doubts about that, but that's my own personal belief, built on, stopping smoking takes a few years of efforts, and you can't give in a few years later. I don't know if it's 4 years or 6 years. One of the questions that I can't give an answer to is, does it depend on the size of organizations? I'm not certain. I'm not that in Octa changes are longer now than when there were 200 of us. I think it takes time for sedimentation to happen, for the corpus to renew, and this with new beliefs.
Third lesson, you need to convince by making people do things. I think it's a French way of doing things when we want to have models. We like to discuss about this or that models, and we've seen this morning. We were just confronting models this morning in the end, and it's about who's right and who's wrong. And if you avoid that, you can really you can act. The best way of transforming someone is to making them act. So what we do at Octa is advise people with agile methodology and transformation. and more, we have an approach where we don't tell them we're going to show you how to be agile. Because if you say the word, then people might be a bit reluctant to change the transformation to the concept. And we realize that when we act with the people, when we give them concrete things to do, then it's easier to change their beliefs and their convictions. We all have the feeling that we are the one deciding in our heads, but psychology tells us that it's not always the case. And we had a few experiments where we realized that after we did something, we often want to say that it was our idea, even if it wasn't. And there are lots of reasons why we want to do that. So when you force your body to do something, then your brain will adapt. And the brain will say, oh yeah, of course I'm agile, if you force your body to be agile first. So that's why I've got the Ford quote. I know that Ford isn't maybe the best person to quote at such a summit, but here's the quote he has: whether you think you can or think you can't, you are right. And we have a fourth lesson. We need to adopt a non-linear rhythm for the maintaining phase that we've seen earlier. What you'll see, the drawing here is not real, but it's used to show how technology used to be adopted in companies. So first you've got a big launch with a peak where everyone is so excited about the new tech. Then you've got a big drop. Nobody talks about that new technology. People realize it doesn't work. And then slowly you're sort of changing your own method around the technology, and then you find productivity and improvement thanks to that technology. And then, sometimes it just stops and you have to change tacks. I can give you a real example for technologies who had a peak and now at a plateau. Well, AI, of course, and blockchain as well. And it's another point where I disagree with Niels. I think that AI can have ideas. So for each of these steps, these phases, we have to change our behavior. And that's lesson number 5. You have to change your tacks depending on which phase you're on. So when people have high expectation, you need to feed that enthusiasm, but also get rid of theoretical criticism. If you say that something is going to revolutionize your company, then everyone will go against it. It's just a reaction. So how do you limit this effect? You also need to reduce the pressure, because when you tell people to innovate but still have documents to file and red tape, and you'll still need to let us know. So you need to create a real framework so that change can happen. Then you have the drop, where you encounter your first setback. You need to show that failure is a way to learn, that you're learning something from that failure. You need to remind everyone of your objectives, and you need to keep on trying to reach your objective. And then everyone has the feeling that something changed, but that's not really the case. We still have stuff that we can't manage to do, but nobody wants to talk about anymore. No one is very sure, so we're not talking about it. And you also have to adapt your behavior there, because you need to relaunch the discussion. If you want to react at some point, of course, please do. You can ask any question you want. It's not really a small group, but it's small enough to interact. And then we have 6th lesson, and it's actually 2 parts. a lesson in two parts. The first part is to agree to disagree, to accept creating conflict. If you want to provoke change, you're going to have a few reactions against you. So when you have a conflict, try to mediate, to not go, for a hard confrontation. But to be honest, I don't see anyone who really likes conflict. Maybe, people on TV whose job it is to create debates. Why not? But polemists, but I don't think just anyone likes conflict. And if you want to really achieve change, you have to accept conflict. So you have to have tools. What we do at Octa is give sort of a leaflet to employees that is called learning how to give and receive feedback. And we realized by giving the tools to people, it really helped them mediate in difficult situation with their peers, with their managers, and to deal with that in a very calm manner. And the second part of the lesson, of the sixth lesson, is to learn how to deal with mistakes. There is a book I like, wrote by Ed Catmull, a Pixar person, and I interviewed him. And I told him, what do you do when an error happens, when some mistake is made? And he said, in my book, I'm not talking about mistakes. I say we try things and some things don't work. So I was sort of flabbergasted about that answer. So we do not need to talk about mistakes. Everything is an experiment. Sometimes experiments fail, sometimes they don't. But it's never a mistake, it's an experiment, it's something to learn from. The seventh lesson is that the biggest restraint is peer pressure, but it can also become the biggest accelerator. So there is one very strong thing within society. We're animals, we're a social animal, and we want to belong in a group. We want to feel part of the group, and that's, there's an explanation to that historically. We cannot survive alone. So when everyone does the same thing within a group, you have to be very strong mentally, personally, to want to do something else. And change is about that. People will need to act differently, singularly, and really differentiate themselves from the majority, and that's difficult to do. It's something that will slow down change, I think. But at some point, there will be a shift in majority, and majority will become your biggest ally, because most of the people will have this new way of doing things, and you will be on the good side of the group, so to say. So our social practices are really, really transferable and transmissible. And it's true for any practice, good or bad. For example, obesity. If in your family, in your environment, you have a lot of people who are obese or overweight, then you have more risks to becoming obese or overweight yourself. If everyone works in an agile way around you, then it's the same thing. You have more chances of becoming agile yourself. So it's true for everything. And we have an experience that shows that, the Ash experience. Someone enters into a room, gives that paper you can see on screen with the lines to the participants, and they ask the people, what is the length of the first line, A, B, C? If the 10 first people say B, and you can see it's not B, if 19 people say B, then the 20th people will say B. Why? Because it's peer pressure. 19 participants said B, and the 20th person cannot say something else, even if it's so bluntly false, just because of peer pressure. And actually, this kind of experience is a situation where when you're activating your suffering part of the brain, the brain that deals with suffering. Then I have another part in the 7th lesson, and it's probably not going to be very much liked. I think that in our advice sector, we have a high turnover. And we usually have a 10 or 20 turnover ratio, or around 15 on average. It's a lot. That's the way it is in council. And with growth, we have a 1% growth a year. And after 3 years, we've managed to renew most of our employees, so more than 50 people in our company now. We're not in our company 3 years ago. That's how it goes in our sector, which means that we can really do U-turns whenever we want because we have new, fresh blood all the time. So we have a very high employee turnover. If you are in a company where there is no employee turnover or no such high employee turnover, then it's going to be more difficult for you to instill change. Change comes with the young generation, with new employees who have a new vision, and it's more difficult, and it's still possible, but more difficult to carry out change. My 8th lesson now. Deep change for an organization goes through leaders' change and transformation. I have a dirty little secret when I stopped smoking is that I had nicotine patches and tablets to help me stop. And to be honest, I think I consumed more nicotine tablets than I used to smoke cigarettes. I also started to exercise. I went to see a doctor. Why am I telling you that? Well, if you try to go on a diet, it's better to go to a nutritionist. If you try to start exercise, it's better to go to a coach. It's much easier to transform when you have support. Why? Because someone is going to push you regularly, remind you of your goals, and remind you of what's at risk if you're not maintaining your effort. And I think it's the same thing when we try to transform a company. In my opinion, it's good for that everyone has resources they can activate and mobilize. It's good to have coaches, professionals with you, to go to conferences, just to collect the most resources possible to remind you why change is a good thing and how to keep you motivated. Lesson number 9, transformation never ends. We are always changing, always transforming, so we should not lose sight of our objectives. I have a colleague who makes a presentation on complex system, and he sometimes organizes meetings to receive feedback on their presentation. And it's funny because this morning I learned a lot about complex systems. And according to this friend, you shouldn't use objectives and aims, but directions and orientations in complex system. So it's so complex that you're not sure you're going to make it in a year, 2 years, 5 years. It's the same thing when you try to quit smoking. You don't know how long it's going to take. In a year, I might still not be smoking. But who knows, maybe in 2 years, 3 years, I'll start again. I can't say. And that's the same thing with transformation. We are moving towards sociocracy with my company, but I can't tell you if it's going to take us 2 or 3 years. What I can tell you is that I'm really motivated and I don't want to stop this transformation. And if it takes 3 years, then that's it. And it's all very well too. But you can't just add new changes every year because it will distract you. You will forget about your first aim and direction. So give time, leave time to time. I think becoming an holacratic or sociocratic company is something that is really a process, a change. It's in movement. It's not a state. Lesson number 10. In a healthy culture, the more you fail, the more you grow closer to success. I mean, a failure is only a failure if you look back to it, 20 years later. If you're still trying, you don't know if it's a failure. It's just another mistake, another failed experiment. And it's once if you try to play the violin, it's only when you become very gifted in violin playing or when you stop playing violin altogether, you realize that starting was a mistake or not. It's sort of the same thing here. I believe that the more you fail, the more you come, the closer you come to success. When you try to stop smoking, you need at least, on average, 5 to 7 tries before you actually stops for good. So you make 5 or 6 mistakes or failed attempts before actually making it. So to conclude, sort of in transformation, my opinion is that the way is more important than the aim, the process is more important than the destination, and that the way of doing things is also more important than the result. A lot of things we've talked about today are in the book, so if you're interested, you can go and buy it. Again, you can download it for free, and that's the end of my presentation. If you have questions, please feel free to ask your question. If not, we can do a little group activity.
La première est toujours un peu compliquée.
It's always difficult to be the first one to ask a question, but don't be shy.
Tu as dit que j'ai beaucoup aimé cette phrase-là.
I liked that when you said that in a complex system you need to work with direction, not with objectives. It's something that really resonated with me. But you talked about the OKR, and can you explain how you find direction with this OKR? Well, that's objective key results for those who didn't know. It's a method of setting objectives, so setting aims. It was created by, I don't remember who, but then Google used it. And all of our clients used to ask us for OKR. And so we just started using that method as well. And it's been 2 years now that we've been using OKR, objective and key result. And at the beginning we thought, okay, we won't manage. We don't know anything about this. It's not going to work. But we decided to learn and change. So we operated transformation, and we're now using them for 2 years now, and it's working well. But the first year we sort of played around with the idea of OKR, and at the beginning we had really bad OKRs, and when we really finished to formulate, to define our objectives, our objective and key results, it took us a year. So is that in contradiction with direction? I don't think so, because an OKR is not a yearly objective. It can be a long-term plan, a long-term objective. That looks like a direction. What's really what would be weird and frightening would be if we had 100% of satisfaction on our OKR. It would mean we would be doing something wrong. Question. You said that individual change is very, very hard. And I see that... wait, I took notes. Let me find my notes. So how does human behavior change? Human has the capacity to change. We need some will, you need individual experience as well. And so you need to put in the effort. So how can you motivate that change? It's a complex question. You have, new behavior that are easy to take on. For example, in a room, everyone smiles. Then, if the person come into the room, then she or he will smile too. And there's a thing. There's also sort of an experiment on the internet. People are waiting in a waiting room. The actors. Someone comes in, and suddenly there's a bell, and everyone stands up when the bell rings, and the participant who knows nothing about the play looks surprised, but then she follows that behavior, and everyone stands up once the bell rings. And when the actors leave the room and new people come in who know nothing about the experiments, the participants start standing up as well when she hears the bell. And the new people come in and they start doing the same thing, and the new people come in and they start doing the same thing. So we tend to mimic the behavior we see if we feel that there's a reason behind it. And I think that, training and helping people to change might cost, but I think that it's useful to help people change. I'm going to say something that's not really PC, but I think that management is important. And unlike leadership, management can be taught. It's something technical. There's a real, reflection about how to manage team, how to give feedback. It's very complex. It's very technical, and I feel that unfortunately we lack training in that matter. Question about setting behavior on the long term. So do you repeat training? How do you ensure that these new behaviors are well acquired? Or do you have good practices to share? Best practices to share? Well, our key is really to have a code. So our new employees go to a training, to a school where we show them how to be agile. And there's not a lot of schools in France for that. They have a month of training with a mentor, and a mentor will give them feedback, tell them they're doing things right or not, or they should change this and that. And then we create a situation where people have to put into practice what they have learned. And I think it's good to have that direct application, implementation, and practice after, because if you wait too long before, between theory and practice, you will forget what you've learned. So once you had the training and you know how to implement that training, put it into practice, then it's really easy. I have a question on what you just said. You work with consultant advisors that go to other clients. So how do you keep the link with the Octa culture when your advisor might go in another company and might, see that other culture from that other company, might be impregnated by this other culture? Well, it's not an easy topic. It's actually quite complicated, especially when some clients have the feeling that we should totally integrate within their teams. But what we do is solve an issue, not solve resources. So when clients come to us with a problem, we solve it our way because we have the solution. And that's why they come to us. So I think it's really the crux of what we do as advisors. We do two things. We do counsel, advising, and coaching. So advising on the one hand and coaching on the other hand. And It means that when a client comes to us, they expect us to bring expertise and know-how to the table to help them solve their issue. So if the client can solve their own issue, then we're no use, you know. But if they come to us, then it's because they need our expertise, so we do things our way. I imagine that many companies come to you. Why is it working? Do they manage to, you know, replicate what you show them, or do they just draw inspiration? Or okay, so if I go back to Octa's history, what really worked for us is to force ourselves to be agile. And there's a point where I actually agree with Niels. You cannot change culture, you can change behavior and rules. You cannot change culture. You can, however, change behaviors. And when behavior are changed, then it will itself in turn change culture. I agree with Niels on that. So people who come to us, if they want to try something new, it will be by changing their behavior gradually on a daily basis. So change will come in a slow manner. I don't really have, solution, a fit-for-all solution. So sometimes it's not very, our work is not always glamorous. It's easier to go and buy the new fancy tools that's going to solve all our issues. But no, it's not. That's not how it works. There's no miracle solution. If you want to lose weight and exercise, you need to go put on your training shoes and go run. And it's quite boring, to be honest, especially the first few days. And then you get into the habit and you go and exercise daily and you take even pleasure in it. I have a question. There's a lot of employee turnover in your company, so how do you recruit? How can we, join your company? Are you interested? Well, how do you join? Well, I don't know. So if I should, if I'm rewording my question, do you have criteria? Do you look for specific personalities? What's really important for us is that we need people who are team players. There's something I forgot to mention, and it's a bit weird also because I've told you all about my books and my works, but there is one thing that's very important at Octa is unity and cohesion. We have a deep understanding that if we're not working collectively, then we are no use. We draw strength from our collegiality. And we encounter a complex problem, and the only solution we can offer is a collective solution. And as for individual construction and growth, we all have a moment where we have the feeling that our success is only due to us, to our own work, and we're a bit selfish that way. And we try to compare ourselves to the other, feeling that maybe we're better or maybe we're not as good as the others. And there's always that sort of phase in our career. Usually it's about 5 to 8 years of experience in our company. And what we try to do is to help people go into the next phase and realize that we are collective and we can only owe our success to the collectivity. I don't know if you know the Netflix philosophy, where they try to really get rid of all toxic characters. And well, we try to do that as well. We're collective and we try to act collectively. Question: do you have an idea of how many companies want or are already managing behaviors? Do they have, how many companies have the tools or the means to say we want this or that behavior? And how can you measure the transformation in behavior? Is it something that companies can do? I mean, it's important transformation to be able to measure. So we don't do it, so I don't know if others do. I'm not aware of companies who goes that far in the process. Again, I like quotes. And there is one that says that there are two dangers that the world must face. Order and disorder. So you need to always make sure that you've got some margin for maneuver, some room for maneuver. So I would like to ask to do a little exercise in small groups. Please gather in small groups of 4 or 5. I know it's not the ideal room to do that, but just try to sit with the people behind you or in your row, and I will give you pens and sticky notes. And what I want you is to talk about transformations, your own transformation, either for your company or from a personal experience. Think about that transformation, quitting smoking, for example, about what helped you, what gave you structure to carry out that transformation, and what stopped you or what slowed you down. So it's basically what drove you and what slowed you down. So I've got sticky notes for you all.
If we are able to get to this stage, if you are online, you should go into breakout sessions and do this on your own. I have no way of checking if this is going to happen or not, or is happening. I apologize.
Écrire les choses qui émergent.
Just write down what comes into your mind. So for each person, something that's helped you or moved you along within the context of a, transformation in a company, or if you don't have an example of this, an individual one. The gentleman's speaking off mic, so it's very difficult to hear what he's saying.
Les consignes sont... Non, c'est bien que tu le répètes. Oui, voilà. Donc l'idée, ce serait que vous partagiez entre vous des expériences de transformation que vous avez eues, soit professionnelles, soit personnelles si vous n'avez pas professionnel, et puis sur les post-it, vous en discutez entre vous, et puis vous notez les choses qui vous ont aidé et les choses qui vous ont freiné, en fait.
So what he wants on the post-it note, on the sticky note, is elements that have helped you and elements that have kept you back and slowed you down. Or ideas, anyway.
Il reste 4 minutes.
You have 4 minutes left. And actually what I wanted to do was to get groups to share, but we are out of time. So what I suggest, and this is just to get your brain trained for transformation, is that as a group, choose one of the principles you identified in the group or in what I presented to you. Individually, take one of the principles presented or the one that you talked about in your group and wonder about, how you can try it and test it over the next 3 months. So positive projecting into something that you want to put in place in your transformation process. This is for the next 3 to 4 minutes. What commitment will you make by your peers to change something in your company or in your life? On n'a pas besoin d'être là pour la cérémonie, je pense pas. Tu crois que si? We're coming to the end of the workshop preparation. You can carry on discussing, of course. I'd like to thank you for taking part in this session. Well, my personal learning among my whole experiences, and this is what I was saying this morning, is that there's often more risk in not doing than in doing something risky, especially when you're in a world, in the company world. And it would be a shame to not go and try things and improve things. It's an environment that's totally adapted to do this, unless, of course, you're an airline pilot or a brain surgeon. In many cases, mistakes don't lead to something that disastrous. And you can also think to really ensure that any mistakes won't lead to something dramatic or disastrous. Of course, the most effective teams in surgery or aviation are able to bounce back from their mistakes. And so don't hesitate to, do things, because we're here on Earth to do stuff, and so make the most of it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.